screams in the night. Indian legends. Miles of footprints. Sightings. What are these elusive hominids that stalk the wilderness? Join us for eyewitness accounts, questions and answers, Bigfoot encounters of the past, and ongoing encounters in the present. Your host, two-time witness, field researcher for 43 years, William Jevning. Welcome to the mystery. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. My voice is still a little broken up with this head cold, so I'm not going to talk too much again for this episode. I'm going to let Tom and Brian take over, and I'm going to sort of sit on the sidelines and interject when needed. So, fellas, take it away.
Great. Hey, Jason.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Very good. So, first, I want to thank you for sending off your encounter. That was pretty interesting. So, usually what we do is I just hand you the mic, or we'll hand you the mic, and just go ahead and tell us about the encounter, a little bit about, what you were doing and how you got there, and then what you saw.
Well, first of all, when I was a kid, I didn't really believe in a Bigfoot. I'd like to have been, believing in a Bigfoot, but I was raised in a household where we just didn't believe in stuff like that. So when I saw what I saw when I was about 5 or 6, I didn't really give it a second thought as to whether it was Bigfoot or really what it was. I just really couldn't believe that I, was seeing what I was seeing. When I was with my dad, up at his and my mom's friend's place. This is the Pacific Northwest on the Oregon coast area. And I was with my mom and dad, and my dad thought it would be really cool to go for a walk because his friend had a right-of-way cut and was going to do something with the piece of property in the back of the right-of-way. At any rate, we got back there, and I was looking. Now, back then, I couldn't really tell as far as how many feet it was, but I could pretty much remember now about how far it was. It was probably 150 feet across, maybe 200 feet in this lot. And I saw, sitting on a stump, what looked to me was primate. I was not even mistaken about it. It was, seemed like it was part chimpanzee and part gorilla because the head was pointed, but it moved around kind of like a chimpanzee. And I would say that he was sitting about 3 feet on the stump. And I don't know why I didn't say anything to my dad. I was just really kind of confused. I was thinking nobody has chimpanzees or monkeys around here. And I felt like I was a little scared. I don't know if it was because it took me back because I was a kid and I couldn't figure out why there would be a monkey out there. Because it's just not an area where there would be a monkey. So anyway, so since then, when I was about 14, I had learned of an encounter that my 4 buddies had. They were hunting in the Pacific Northwest, and they were going up this hairpin turn. It was at the end of the hunting day, and they didn't see anything all day. So they were going up this hairpin turn, and right there on the right, they said that they saw a Bigfoot. Now, they knew it was a Bigfoot because they said that it was about anywhere between 8 to 9 feet tall. and it was just standing there about 10, 14 feet away from their rig. And they said that it was unbelievable. They knew that it was happening, but it was just unreal. And so what they did was they continued around the hairpin turn and kept going up the grade, and they pulled over, and they did something that most viewers that I've been listening to on this show would not have done. But they proceeded to go into the gully to see if Bigfoot or that this creature were if they could catch him going down. And this creature had already been going down, so they went down far enough to where it was an area where like the bed was nothing but moss all over everything. Like it was old, real old. And they saw a family of Bigfoot, Mama and Papa and two adolescents, and they said that they were kind of wrestling around like they were playing. And so, you know, when you have a friend or more than one buddy that tells you something and you know that they don't lie, and they're pretty much on the up and up people, you know that they're telling the truth. You just can't put that down. I'm not the kind of person that says, oh, no, you know. I want to take a person serious if that's what they said that they saw, you know. So since then, I've talked to other people that have had the same kind of experiences, and every time you hear someone talk about an experience, it's like the evidence just starts stacking up, especially when the stories are the same. And these people that I've talked with, they don't even know each other. And so since I've been listening to this real cool podcast for about a month, I just started thinking about what I saw out in the woods. I don't know. It wasn't really that big. I mean, but I don't know. Could it be an infant or a...
Hey, Jason, I have a question for you. Very interesting.
Sure.
You said it moved like a chimp. What was it doing?
It was eating. And the reason why it was actually the mannerisms were more like a chimp. Like his knees were up in the air, like his feet were planted in front of him as he was sitting on the stump. And he was kind of crouched over, and he was eating something. And I can't tell you the reason why I know this, but all I do know is that he was paying attention to us in his peripheral vision as he was eating. Like he wasn't really scared, but he was watching me.
Size-wise, what would you compare it to? You know, to another animal.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just trying to get an idea of how old it might have been. Do you think it was about chimp size, a little larger, smaller?
I think he was a chimp size.
Sounds like a pretty young one then.
Yeah. No, he wasn't big at all. And that's one of the reasons why I've always dismissed it as Bigfoot, because it's like whenever I hear of Sasquatch or Bigfoot, I hear of, well, this 7-foot to 12-foot creature. And so that's why I've dismissed it all this time. But at the same time, we were pretty far away from the zoo.
Mm-hmm. Right. Did you get an idea what it was eating?
No.
Okay.
It was kind of white.
Hey, Jason. So quick question. I know where you live now. We're not going to say where, but were you living in that same town? And was it somewhere several miles, many miles west of there? Or because you were on the Oregon coast, right?
Yeah. And I really don't mind saying where I was at. I was living in Hillsboro, Oregon at the time.
Okay. All right. I know where that is.
And we, there's a lot of country back then that was around Hillsboro, and connected to that was the mountain range.
Mm-hmm.
And
the coastal mountain range or the Cascades?
the coastal.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And at any rate, yeah, it's really good, interesting. It's a real good area to hunt in. A lot of Roosevelt elk and whatnot.
No, I've been up there. I know the area. It's especially when you get up around the very upper northwest section of Oregon, and you get up in the coast hills. It's dense, temperate rainforest.
Yeah.
And I don't know what color was this thing. I don't know if Will asked that or not. I apologize if he has.
No, that's okay. That's just the thing. I almost didn't even see this guy. I think that they have real uncanny ways of hiding him in broad daylight. Sometimes I think that they're out in the open. We don't even realize that they're there. I think that they can camouflage themselves in front of trees and whatnot. I almost didn't even see this guy because right where he was on the stump, he was kind of, in the area where I thought was an opening through a tree. But then I kept examining him, and I thought, no, that's not a crack. That's not a area through the trees. That's something living. And then when he moved to eat, that's when I noticed that he was like a primate. And so his color would have been a darker brown.
Hey, Jason, what did you do immediately after you saw it? Did you run away? And also, how many seconds did you get a look at this thing?
Shoot. It seemed to me that we were there for a minute or two, so I just kept looking at it. I did feel a fear, but no, I didn't run. I didn't run because it didn't do anything aggressive.
Now, you said your dad was with you, or somebody else, that some other people were with you at the time, or?
Yeah.
Do you know if they saw it?
Nope.
Okay, were they like a little further away from you?
I didn't tell my dad because he was always this guy that says, Jason, stop telling stories. So I just didn't say anything to him because I knew what he would say.
Now, Jason, you said that you saw this as a kid. As you got older, did you ever tell him?
Yeah, I've told this story to other people, and they just blow it off. But I don't care. I know what I saw.
How old were you at the time, Jason?
5 or 6.
And what was your dad's reaction later on when you told him? Was he still kind of skeptical?
Oh yeah, he's pretty skeptical.
Did you get a chance to see this thing's face? Like, did it have a snout, or?
It did. It did. The nose kind of came down low, and then it was a little wide.
No, what came down low?
His nose.
Oh, his nose. Okay.
Low and wide, and it looked like he had a scowl on his face. I didn't know if maybe he didn't want us there, or what the deal was. But, he never made any noise. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking that if this is a baby Bigfoot, why would the other adults not come around and, come to its aid?
Well, they were probably there, but you probably didn't see them. They were probably hidden, but they were probably in the area.
How far away was your dad?
Oh, she was right beside me. Yeah.
And he didn't see it though?
No, he didn't even say anything about it. I saw it.
So this thing was your dad like looking in a different direction, and you were kind of looking in the direction of this? Was this thing to your right or left or straight in front of you?
It was to my left. My dad was looking to the right. But I wasn't looking at my dad when I was looking at this thing, so I don't know everywhere that my dad was looking. So does
Go ahead.
Is there any other experiences like that you've heard like this?
Actually, a few. Yeah, there was a guy we had on the show. Oh, geez, I think it was last year, and it was actually here in Northern California, and he encountered two juveniles, and it was kind of a comical story because one was doing stuff to the other one and kind of making it mad, and he did all this stuff right in front of the guy, and he never saw the adults, but I think if I remember correctly, these two would have been approximately the size of what you're describing, but absolutely, we've heard of the stories like that.
Will, yeah. Is that the one where one of them hits the other one in the head with a stick?
Right.
I love that one. Jason, so this, I'm just going to say, it sounds like the area might have been, if it was it west of Hillsboro, like maybe looking towards Tillamook or?
Oh gosh, there's two ridges. It's west of Portland, on Portland,
right?
Going more toward Forest Grove.
Okay.
And we have two ridges, and I do not remember to this day which one it was. We had Bald Peak Ridge, and then we had Pumpkin Ridge, and we were on either one of those ridges. Okay. But I do know that it was the one that was closest going toward Forest Grove.
Now, how close was the site to the ones that your friends had?
Oh, not really that far, really. But the area was pretty secluded, though, for outside of Hillsboro.
Now, with the friend sighting that they had, you said that they went down and they observed these Sasquatch, like basically a family. And yes. What was the reaction of the creatures when they saw your friends?
You know, the only time that they've talked about how they were being observed by this thing was the one that was actually standing there, and they said he was around 8 to 9 feet tall, and he just watched them drive by. He was not scared or nothing, and he didn't get too excited either. Now, I've been listening to the show, and most people that talk about this Sasquatch experience talk about how they're hostile. They start moving back and pacing back and forth and moving their arms side to side and screaming at them and carrying on. And so I just don't understand why this group of Bigfoot that my friends saw was so docile.
Now, were they in the car the whole time, or did they actually get out of the car?
They did actually get out of the car after they went around the hairpin turn.
How many were in the group, the people?
4.
4 people. Okay. So that's probably why the behavior wasn't as aggressive. When there's a larger group of people, that changes the odds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did they have rifles or guns of any kind, do you know, or?
Oh, they probably had rifle. They were rifle hunting.
Yeah, see, so that compounded the situation also. When you got a large group of armed people, that would definitely put these things in a different frame of mind than, say, some of the witnesses we've had that were either by themselves or maybe with one other person, and these things acted in an agitated or aggressive manner.
Yeah. Now, I had another buddy and it was the next one that I heard after the first one I told you. and he was in Sisters, Oregon, and he too saw a family of them, a mama, papa, and a juvenile that was getting on up there actually, but he saw them probably at 50 yards away. He was hunting up there too with the rifle, and he was at a tree's edge of a meadow, and the dad noticed he was there, and he didn't seem to alert the mom and the juvenile, but he sure kept his eye on him. He got a chance to see it through a scope. He said that his face can be very intimidating.
So he was actually hunting outside of the town of Sisters or the Three Sisters wilderness.
Oh, he was out in the wilderness. He wasn't in town, no. He was way out.
In his case, did he have any description as to how tall they were?
He told me that this guy was as tall as a street sign. Not a street sign up on the telephone wires, but like a street sign coming out on a metal post on the corner of a street.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know how many feet that is, but he said that the male was about that tall, and the female was probably a foot shorter than him, maybe.
I think stop signs and those kind of things are about 8 feet.
Yeah.
How long ago did this, do you know how long ago this occurred when he saw this?
Oh my gosh, I've known him for 25 years, and it probably happened about 5 years before that, so I'd say about 30 years ago.
And was this kind of in the same area on the coast of Oregon, or was this a different?
No. The Sisters Wilderness is Central Oregon, I'd have to say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I heard, are notorious for seeing Sasquatch out there.
And did he happen to describe what color they were?
They were brown.
Okay.
Did he say what they were doing by chance?
They walked in from one end of the meadow, and they just kept walking right on out on the other side of the meadow. Kind of like it was almost like that's what they did every day or something.
Mm-hmm.
They acted like they knew exactly where they were going. So,
yeah, and that's interesting that the male may have noticed but didn't alert the female and the adolescent.
Yeah,
almost just like giving him like a visual warning just to stay away.
Yes, he was. He said he was definitely keeping his eye on him. And this guy also has heard Bigfoot. He said that he's heard them more than he's seen them.
Did he describe what it sounded like, or?
It was just like that howl. That he told me that it sounded like an air raid. He compared it to like an air raid. It goes slow and then high and then back down to low again.
Now, is this? Does he live in the same area as this now?
Oh no, he lives where I live now.
Okay, but the sounds that he's hearing, though, they're from recently or from
oh
back?
No.
Oh, okay.
This is when he's been out camping, because he goes way out. He doesn't mess around about it.
Oh, okay.
How far away from the little one? You know, when you're a kid, do you have a kind of a sense of the distance between you and the one you saw?
Yeah, I'm thinking back about what it seemed like, and it seemed like I was about 100, 150 yards, maybe 200 yards, or not yards, but feet away.
Okay. So a little ways away then.
Yeah.
Now, later on, growing up, did you, aside from your friends that you talked to, did you ever hear of any other stories in that area, or did you, as you got older, begin to? Well, first of all, did you ever see the Patterson film at that time?
I've seen the Patterson film. I've seen the Patterson film. Yes.
Okay.
Did you see it before or before you saw before you saw the little one or afterwards?
Oh, no, I don't think that I saw the Patterson film until after I saw the monkey,
Oh, I
or
see. Okay.
what I thought was a monkey. But his hair seemed to be bigger than a chimpanzee. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he was more hairy.
I was just about that. How long was the hair? Would you say, say how many inches would you guess?
8-9 inches.
Okay.
I was wondering too. You mentioned that when the guys asked about it, it's whether its face was flat or protruding. Was it just the nose that was protruding, or did it have like a simian type face? You know what I mean, where the nose and mouth and everything is sort of drawn out?
Yes, the nose and the mouth was drawn out a bit.
A little bit more like a chimp then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I was going to ask too.
But the head was definitely pointed.
Yeah, I was going to ask too. Your friends, when they gave you their accounts, did they describe the face as being more ape-like or more man-like, or did they maybe not say either way?
You know what? They didn't say either way. But the only thing that one of my friends said, and this is the one that saw him in the Sisters Wilderness area, is that he could get ugly. If he wanted to, he could really mean business and put the fear into you.
And this is the guy that's looking at it through. He was scoping it through the rifle.
Yes.
Okay. And that's a different guy than the guy that saw the family on the Oregon coast. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, and they don't even know each other.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Now, this last one, which I thought was a real interesting one, and it also collaborated with the accounts that I heard on Devil, and also that other show has. Anyway, this guy said that he felt like he was hunted, and clapping
Hey, Jason.
from his left and on his right.
I think he's breaking up a bit.
Yeah, Jason, are you still there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. It's we're getting a little bandwidth saturation, kind of losing.
Okay.
Can you repeat that? Say that again. What you just said a moment ago.
Okay. So where was I? Or when was the last time you heard?
Well, just you're given an account, and then it kind of broke up a little bit. So
Well, I'll start from the beginning then. This last account that he or his account collaborated with a lot of stuff that I heard on this show and the other show that Will has about how Bigfoot can act like they're hunting you, but it could be practice of some sort. And that's exactly what he told me. He told me that it was like a teenager. So he was a really good size, and he was albino. But the other one was a brownish color.
this is that family.
This is the last account that was told to me by a guy where I live right now.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this is probably the account where he reacted most like what I've heard people talk about on the show here, where he was just completely petrified, and he just started running, and to him, they were real hot on his back, even though he couldn't see him. He just knew he was being followed, and it just completely terrified him. But as he was running, he was flanked on the right, and this albino Sasquatch ran right in front of him, like he crossed right in front of him and disappeared into the woods. And there was another one following him on his left.
Yeah, and he was alone too, right?
Yeah, no, he was running, and I believe his cousins were ahead of him on the trail.
Okay.
Yeah. He described the same way people describe it, that he felt like he was being hunted, or when it was over, he decided that he wasn't really being hunted, but it must have been some sort of a practice, because he felt like if
Well, Jason, I got to thank you. This was very interesting, and kind of in my backyard as well. So I don't know. I don't have any more questions. Brian?
No, I don't have any more questions either.
Awesome. Jason, thanks a bunch. It was an excellent encounter. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, very interesting, Jason. Everyone, we definitely say, thanks to Jason for joining us and telling us about this stuff. It'd be interesting to hear from your friends if they're willing to talk, about their encounter with the family group there. And,
okay.
But yeah, if they're willing to do that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Have them shoot an email to the same one that you contacted us with. We'd love it. That'd be great.
And Jason,
okay.
keep in touch with us. That's a real active area, and I'd like to hear more from that area.
I would too, and I would really. I wish that I could give you more information on what I saw. It was brief and very little. I know that I didn't have much to give you guys, but
You did a good job.
Was it? Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, everyone. We're going to take a quick break and stay tuned for the next segment. All right, welcome back to the Q&A section, everyone. John Schweitzer is joining us this evening for the Q&A. Tom, you had the first question, and let's dive right in.
Okay. So JR asks, historically the Vikings landed in North America, but they left after 15 to 20 years, so a very short period of time, and because of something called the Skraelings. I hope I pronounced that right, but it's spelled Skralangs. The Skraelings were described as large, swarthy, hairy, with dark eyes. The Skraelings were, it says they were a different word than what the Vikings used for the Native Americans or the Indians. And the Skraelings were apparently very fearsome. And so JR wants to know, do we think the Skraelings may have been Sasquatch? And then I got a little bit of a follow-up to that.
That's entirely possible, sure.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit odd that they describe, and again, this is in the Norse sagas. They're described as a very large, hairy, again, scary creature type of man, but it had dark eyes, and so yeah, who knows? But the follow-up that I have is on a similar note. Have we seen, it's almost a rhetorical question, but have we seen behavior in historic accounts that is also seen in the modern accounts? Because this would seem to validate, the existence of Sasquatch and the accounts of both the new and the old as legit. In other words, if you see behavior that happened, say, in the 1600s, 1700s, and it's identical or very similar to what we're seeing today.
Yeah, even...
number one...
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, have we seen that? And that would seem to validate.
Yes, If you look even in the past 200 years of written accounts, that behavior is like a lot of these stories. I go back to mentioning, across time and geography. So there's a lot of consistency in these behaviors.
Okay. And that's something that I found kind of interesting because, you read some of these historic accounts. Honestly, you could just switch the clock on that and bring it up into 2018, 2019, and it would be right out of current events, current encounters.
I wasn't actually aware that the Scandinavians, the Vikings, had made mention of it, and then that specifically was the reason they left North America.
Yeah, I actually have a copy of the Norse Saga, so I will dig through it and see if I can find it. But I think I've heard that before, that they came over, and historians, I think, in the past thought that, and I could be wrong, so all you historians out there, if I'm wrong, please let me know. But I believe it was thought that they left because of conflict with Native Americans. But the name Skraeling is a totally different name than what was used for the Native Americans, or the Indians of Canada.
Right. Oh, very interesting.
Hey, well, I have a question about perhaps evolutionary adaptations that they may have had. And I'm not talking about behavior-wise. I have more questions about that, maybe a little bit later. But I'm talking kind of about Mother Nature and basically science. Have the descriptions of these creatures changed over the decades? And what I mean by that is specifically, okay, so if you look at, for example, a killer whale, it is black on top, which means that if it's swimming under a prey, an animal that it's hunting, it's going to be hard for it to see, for the animal to look down below, because it's, the dark ocean depths. And then the killer whale, it's also white on the bottom, which means that if it's swimming above a prey, it's going to also kind of be invisible against the light ocean top and the sky. And then even taking that further, the killer whale, it also has these gigantic white eye patches, which when you look at a killer whale, everybody looks at it and thinks that its eyes are the eye patches, when in fact the actual eyeballs are really small, and they're located in the front and beneath those eye patches, which means that if it's hunting something and the prey, the animal that it's hunting, is defending itself, it will go after the eye patches and not the actual eyes. And so that's just kind of a long-winded example of one evolutionary adaptation. But I was just wondering if the Sasquatch has maybe had undergone some similar types of evolutionary adaptations. Like, so for example, what I mean by that is, I know that you've talked in the past about how reports of them used to be that they were kind of reddish in color, but now a lot more descriptions are of the Sasquatches being just like almost pitch black in color. And I was just wondering if that is maybe a product of it, kind of an evolutionary adaptation.
Yeah, I was thinking of that exact example when you were talking about it. The reports for many, many, many years were largely reddish brown in color, with some brown and black, but the majority was that reddish brown cinnamon color, it was called. Where today we're getting a lot more variety. It could be either changes, or we're just seeing more of these other individuals now. It's one of the two, so I'm not really sure.
Well, I've got a question here, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, hold on. I'm sorry there. I've got several questions down here. Several people have asked me things, and some of them are pretty basic questions. And, I was able to give them answers. I mean, it's everything from the color of Bigfoot to how big of a gun would you need. All right. But Charles asked me, he says, does Bigfoot have hair or fur? Is it like guard hair, as it would be, say, on a mink, with a fluff of cotton below, or would it actually be hair like you would see on a human being, only longer, 3-6 inches? And why would it be longer on the, say, the forearm back near the elbow, as opposed to shorter on the closer you get to the wrist, to the knuckles? Is there a reason for that? I think he was thinking basically of draining water off, that sort of thing. And he's the one that also asked, he doesn't go into the woods. And he says he's scared to death to go into the woods. He says he listened to entirely too many shows, I guess, is what he said. And he did ask me about the firearm issue. And I am an NRA instructor, a former, whichever. I just told him, carry whatever you can feel comfortable with, and learn how to place a shot. But by no means shoot these things. What's your feelings on both of those, guard hair and the other?
Well, they don't have fur. It is more the guard hair with an undercoat, and that suits animals very well, like deer, especially in the western part of the country where weather is inclement much of the time, because you can get that outer hair wet, not so much the under hair, so you've got more insulation, and also that outer hair doesn't necessarily snag on trees and stuff like the undercoat would. So that's what it looks like from all we've gathered to this point. That's what they have.
So would it be like, yeah,
Go ahead.
Would it be like, yeah, when you say guard hair and an undercoat, are you still talking hair like on a human's head or like on a human's arm, with the same kind of hair, only shorter? Would you be able to see the skin through this guard hair or through the hair?
Well, I can only tell you what I saw. I couldn't see the skin through the fur, or not fur, through its hair, because it was rather thick. Where I could see the skin was on its feet. And and there was, someone sent me a picture. Someone took it. I can't remember what the circumstances were. It was something, on YouTube. And, some of these things people, they put on there and they say, oh, this is the best picture ever and all this. From what I saw with my own eyes, what I saw on the creature was totally different than what was in the picture. In other words, when I saw the feet, the hair would come down over the top of the foot. It was coming out of the top of the foot, but didn't grow onto the toes as much. So the hair was sort of draped over the toes a little bit, and I could see the skin just above the toes and on the toes. So that was my visual. But
Did the toes look human?
They were. Hold on. Sorry about that. We get these random calls sometimes. Telemarketers.
All the time.
I would say somewhat human-ish. They weren't exactly like our toes, but kind of in the same family.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
And Will, what color was the skin? Was it
It was a grayish.
like black?
No, it was grayish color, almost an ash color.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Will, how big were the eyes? And I think I heard you say you had noticed one time that these things, they didn't have a friendly look. They just had this kind of a soul-piercing stare or something.
Yeah. I don't know if I could gauge the size of the eyes. They were large. Bigger than golf ball size, but not as big as tennis ball. I guess you could go halfway in between that, but that's just a guesstimate. So,
as big as a hard-boiled goose egg?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
Like I said,
Not that hard-boiled makes any difference.
like I said, it was one of those situations where I wasn't trying to size up any particulars. I was more scared about my backside, just getting it out of there. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Hey, Will, it's kind of a follow-up to that. How long, and not just your experience, but a lot of the people that you've talked to that have had encounters, how long is the stare time? And what I mean by that is, how long do they stare at you? And are they just making eye contact because they're surprised to see you? Or do they stand there and try to actually intimidate you with their stare?
Well, as far as what they're doing, it depends on the situation. In my case, I don't know what they were doing. We had an incident in Montana recently where the lady said, and I think we talked about this on another show, that was the report I got where she said that she felt that it had the overwhelming feeling by the look on its face that she was its next meal. So what kind of a look that is, I'm not sure, but because that's subjective to the person. But length of time,
Sizing one up.
yeah, the length of time could be a few seconds up to 15, 20 minutes. I've had people say that. My own encounter was it was probably seconds. Probably less than a minute or two. Other people much longer. Some people just a few seconds. They see something, encounter it, and it's gone, or they're gone. One of the two.
Well, I got a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, somebody had asked me, they said they'd heard that somebody had got some DNA samples. They do the analysis, and it's there's no record of it. They say it's out of this world, and I don't think they mean it's from another planet or extraterrestrial, but it simply doesn't match up anything in the genome. Have you heard if there are possibly DNA samples from these creatures?
No. I mean, people may have stuff, but here, we've talked about DNA before. The thing is, if you don't have something that's a known sample to compare it to, then it's an unknown. Now, just because it's unknown, you can have lots of samples tested that could come up unknown. That doesn't mean they're Bigfoot. I think people, they've made the inferences. They think the sample, some of these people have said this, that they have samples that are Bigfoot, and it was DNA and tested and came back, with whatever result. But I can tell you that, we've discussed this through our police officer friend whose acquaintance that was a deputy sheriff took a sample, from an incident where the kid was grabbed off or pulled off the bike, and they ran that. They did the big expensive test, and it came back unknown primate. That's the best you're going to get.
Okay, so it would come back as an unknown primate. I mean, I would think that would be significant, though.
Well, it still doesn't prove anything because, it could be any unknown primate. Just because it's not in their system, you know what I mean?
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Right.
And even if it's just, they had a whole bunch of primates in there and it's unknown primate, it still doesn't do much for you. I mean, what's going to come of that?
Right.
You know what
Right.
I mean? Who's going to? Who's going to take that information and say, "Yep, we got Bigfoot. We got Bigfoot DNA." Nobody's going to.
Yeah, no, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think he was asking that. I think he was just asking if there are, presumably, if some government agency has shot one or bagged one somehow.
Oh,
I would imagine
sure,
they
would know.
Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. So down the road, who knows? Maybe years down the road, at some point, it may get categorized or cataloged into some sort of a general project or something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you'd have to have a working model. You'd have to have something to work from to do the DNA, or even hair samples.
Yeah, you've got to have known samples.
I got a question here. Fingerprints. I've got several people ask me about that, and one person brought up the idea, we kind of elaborated on it, of gathering fingerprints. So we got to have something that they could put a fingerprint in. So the idea came in around of maybe taking modeling clay and packing it into, say, something like a cookie sheet that has a lip around the edge, and then putting that out in the woods to see what would touch it, put a paw print in it, try and eat it. And it was even gone to, well, if a Bigfoot would eat modeling clay, you'd be able to pick that up, almost track an individual by the scat that would remain.
Well, two things.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, two things. First of all, there are prints, with fingerprints. I've got a couple sets myself from two different sources. Very good prints on glass. So, and secondly, anything you put out in the woods, thinking a Sasquatch is going to come near it, forget it, because primates are extremely wary of especially human-made objects in their environment. It's different when they come around and touch the glass on cars. That's one thing. That's something that's in their environment that they're trying to check out. But just putting things out there, most likely they're not going to touch it.
Okay. Let me ask real fast here. Now, Mike asks about, he says, why is it that they smell like rotten meat, etc.? Could it possibly be due to glands?
Yes.
Or as a way of territorial marking, or even a way of fending off of a threat? And he commented, he says, he knows that a ferret will let off an odor that will stop you in its tracks. I know what he's talking about there.
Right, yeah.
They feel threatened.
And there are other primates that do the same thing. So we know these things don't have a bad odor all the time. 7 out of 10 reports don't. And usually when there is something that's reported, there's something else going on that's probably caused some form of agitation with the creature.
Where are the scent glands located, Will?
I think with primates, I want to say hands. Primates are on their hands or arms. What's that, Brian? You had an answer for that.
I was going to say from what I've read about gorillas, it actually is almost from their armpit or around the shoulder area. So who knows? But that's just what I've read with like mountain gorillas, and so forth. And they don't do it as necessarily a conscious thing. It's just from what I've read, it's just more of when they get anxious for some reason.
Yeah, it's an autonomic response.
Yeah. But I think it comes from the I think it's the left shoulder area, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, yeah, well, the Sasquatch is probably very similar then.
Yeah. Hey, Will, I was going to ask you, do the reports, and also I guess the ones that you saw in your first encounter, do they have protruding ears, or are the ears, I guess, internal?
Well, they're probably partially covered by hair, and they're small. If you look at gorillas, and chimps are big, but gorillas are pretty small, their ears. And these things are it's something when you look at the vast majority of reports, you don't see it. They're not reported. So typically they're not seen. And for that reason, they're probably small and covered by hair.
Right. Okay.
That brings up a kind of a follow-up question. What do you think their primary sense is when they're hunting? Do they rely on visual or audio or scent?
Well, almost all primates, us included, when you look at the 5 senses and the correlating places in their brains, vision is by far the largest.
Okay. Do you think it would be possible to fool one of these things or conceal yourself with a ghillie suit or some other sort of, camouflage?
I think it's possible, sure.
Okay.
I heard of a couple of fellows that did that. One of them said that it was that they were hidden, and that it passed them close enough that he could have reached out and touched him. Now, how true that is, I don't know, but I'm trying to remember who it was. It was one of the good old boys. Let me put it that way. But I couldn't tell you who.
There was a guy that I saw on the internet some time ago, and I think he's sort of well known, I think, in some of the Bigfoot circles. His name's Mike Worley. And
Yeah.
He was out hunting, I think, on either Christmas or Thanksgiving, and he saw one of these. He was in his tree stand. Will, have you heard of this one? He was down in Alabama or Arkansas.
I've heard of that.
Was he
Yeah,
was he the guy who passed away recently?
Yes.
Oh, he did? Okay, I didn't know that. But I remember I saw an interview with him on YouTube, and I thought, here's a guy that's telling the truth. I mean, if you can look for deception or somebody making, all the facial expressions said this guy was authentic. I'm just curious if you heard of him.
Yeah.
To verify something with this story, I'm sorry, I got about a second and a half delay on things. Is this story where when he got up close to the truck, he took a shot?
Yep. Yeah.
And hit the tree, and the face looked like he was pretty pissed off.
Yeah, that's the story.
Yep.
That's exactly.
Yep.
And just wondering, Will, if you'd heard of that, and if you had any comments or.
The only comment I have would be regarding shooting at one. I've had people ask me that question. I know it's a little bit off that, but with the Sasquatch, it does tick them off if you shoot at them, for the obvious reasons. But the problem with
a human trait, yeah.
The problem with going out and shooting one is if you don't take it out before it makes some kind of noise, you're going to have the rest of the group on you. So it's really not a good thing to be thinking about doing.
Yeah, and you mentioned that before, and that totally makes sense because it sounds like if you shoot one and it hollers, you're probably not going home.
Exactly.
Amen.
Yeah. Hey, Will, I was going to ask to kind of switch subjects. I know that John was asking about their hair and their hair / fur, whatever. But how long is their hair described to be in most accounts?
It varies. Some a few inches. Some people have said up to 6 inches. Some portions longer. It's not the same length all over their bodies. Even when you look at the Patterson film, it looks like it's the same length overall, but it's really not.
Right, and I imagine a lot of that could also be from nutrition. I mean, if they're not well fed, then they probably have thinner hair, I would imagine.
That's possible, sure. And where? I mean, depending on what they're doing and what they're, rubbing up against, they could be, hair could be broken off and things like that, so.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of hair, we've got a question here. A fellow wants to know if the hair color in a Bigfoot changes color due to the season, like it does with a white-tailed deer, or maybe due to its age. I know I saw a deer today, a white-tail, and it was just a very pretty red head standing out there. And that same white-tail, when season gets around, it's going to be gray in color. So there you go. There's a question.
No, they won't change with season, but they will change with age. Typically, the young ones are jet black, and as they mature, they get brown or that cinnamon reddish brown color, sometimes gray.
Well, I don't know if the next one has to do, it's going to sound kind of out there. And I've got feelings that they're just kind of mixed on. Well, not really mixed. I know what I think, but same fella in talking about the hair, and he wants to know if a Sasquatch, they've got the ability to cloak itself. Now, cloaking to me means, just complete invisibility. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if he meant camouflage due to their hair color, because that's the way the question kind of came into being. Any thoughts?
No cloaking. I mean, look,
Okay.
compare it to other primates. What other primate cloaks? Do we cloak? No. No, and when it comes to the visual things, now think back to when Chris was on. Remember Chris up in Alberta? And we need to have Chris on again soon. Yeah. When he talked about hearing those noises, he was pursuing the elk herd. He didn't know the large male was that close to him. Apparently, it was in a prone position, and he turned to look at a noise he thought he heard behind him. When he turned back, the thing was already up and on its feet in front of him. So they hide very well. They move very odd compared to our thinking about movement of a hominid type creature, and they're extremely fast. So those kind of things could add up to, people thinking that because they can appear or disappear very quickly, might give the appearance of cloaking, but they don't cloak.
Hey, Will, this is kind of... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna just comment on that, on the way the Bigfoot moves. I watched a documentary the other night on mountain lions, and one of the reasons mountain lions are so quiet is because they will put their hind foot in the exact same spot as the front paw, their direct register. So when they walk, that front foot finds the quiet spot, or it makes the, basically the feels for the quiet. It's part of their stalking strategy. And Bigfoot does the same thing, and I just wanted to comment or your opinion.
Well, think about how they place their feet versus how we walk. We roll our foot, so you have a lot of opportunity for noise to be made. These things pick their feet up, move them, and set them down. If you're hunting very stealthily, you kind of walk the same way. You don't roll your feet when you're hunting. You pick your feet up and you place them quietly down. And these things move that way naturally.
Yeah, Tom, that's actually a great point. And I know this is, switching creatures for a little bit, but I know that owls, for instance, they have something in their feathers which makes them basically completely silent to mice or whatever they're hunting. So yeah, they're very stealthy in the same way that I'm sure that Sasquatches are as well, when, as Will said, not rolling their feet over.
I can say one thing about the owls, that they are totally silent. I've been walking through the woods, and all of a sudden I have one fly in front of me, and I don't know what would be more scary, running into a Sasquatch, have this big face and go boom, boom, boom.
Well, and think about their hair too. We're talking about here, that guard hair, instead of snagging on things to make noises, it's going to slide over branches and things. So that's another way they keep quiet.
Okay. These are all good poking holes in the whole paranormal thing. They just sort of, float through some sort of dimension or something unseen. Yeah, no, they just have natural characteristics and traits that enable them to do that.
Which aren't that much different than other predatory animals.
Right, yeah.
Hey, well, this is kind of maybe a personal question, but how have your views on these creatures changed over the decades? So, for what I mean by that is, for example, when you first saw one, you were only in your teens, but as you began to do more research and as you interviewed a lot of people, were there any kind of revolutionary changes in your opinions from the from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and today?
Well, I think those opinions, and outlook change gradually over time. But I'd say as far as the overall view, the greatest one would be going from, looking at these things as what they originally thought, that they were vegetarian, to realizing that they're an apex predator. And that fills a lot of the gaps in terms of behaviors and such.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very interesting.
Speaking of behaviors, it's been said that Bigfoot migrates from one area to another, or at least this is what seems to be understood. due to season and availability of the food source. If this is true, would they relocate in exactly the same area each season? And if so, wouldn't there be enough evidence left from those where they're occupying the areas? And if that's true, like when you have your this long question here, it goes into tree structures and why no Bigfoot prints underneath the tree structures if that's the area that they're occupying.
Well, they don't. I don't like the word migrate. They don't migrate, because what that implies, you think about birds, moving from one region to the next because of weather and things like that. That's not how the Sasquatch operates. They move constantly throughout their range. They have an established range. A group, unit, pod, whatever you want to call them. 4 to 6 individuals, typically. They have a set area that they occupy, but they're on the move continuously. About every 2 weeks, they move. A lot of these structures, in my opinion, the reason they don't have Sasquatch footprints around them is because Sasquatches didn't make those. There was nothing ever in the history written about structures. I've never really seen any of these structures in the wild myself. So personally, I don't think they do that. Some rudimentary ones possibly, but a lot of these things that they're put on Facebook and elsewhere, I don't think they're doing that.
Well, the migration then, with what you're saying, if I'm getting it in my mind's eye, so to speak, of early man being hunter-gatherers, going where the food is in your area.
What you have to do is look at how gorillas move. These things move very similar to how gorillas do. Now, what gorillas do, they'll move throughout their range, much smaller ranges, of course. Now, and I always refer to the group that I really focused on, through the 80s and 90s. I followed this group around for all those years, for about 12 years, and I was able to kind of focus. I knew where they were going to be within a 30-day time frame throughout the range. They moved in a clockwise fashion throughout their range. And let's say, in January they were in area A, and then February B, and so on. Actually, it was a little shorter because it was about every 2 weeks they'd move. But the following year, let's say they come back around to that area, or section A, they would not come back to the same place. Those areas could be 5-10 miles in size. They might be over in the west side one year, the north the next year, and so on. They never come back to the same place twice.
Kind of like distinguishing counties within an area.
Yeah, right. And it makes
maybe in the northern part of the county or the western.
It makes them extremely difficult to track.
And Will, you said they can have a home range of 500,000 square miles.
Well, that group occupied a 3,300 square mile area, and I actually, just the past year or two, discovered it was larger than that. So I don't know the exact size of that range. I just know the area that I looked at.
Wow, that would be, and you look at the terrain, that I'm assuming that area you're talking about was up in Washington.
Right, southern Washington, Skamania County primarily.
Yeah, that is some rugged country. That'd be really, really brutal to go through and try to track and follow those things.
And you have to consider, if they're moving like that, they're moving roughly every 14, 15 days. They're in predatory mode. They're hunting. They have that large range. They don't come back and they don't repeat the same particular place. They'll come back to the same kind of region. Whatever you want to call it, if they're a generalized feeding area, but they'll change the spots throughout that each year they come through. And they want to avoid human contact. All those things make it extremely difficult to get to them.
And you had mentioned sometimes they never walk in a straight line. They usually do a zigzag or a serpentine.
Usually they just kind of, it's weird, they kind of meander around with no rhyme or reason. Apparently they have a reason for doing it, but when you find an area with tracks, a lot of times, sometimes they'll be in straight lines, a lot of times they're not.
Yeah, and well, this is not really a question, but just an observation to what you just said too, because I've kind of wondered in the past, why do they move around? Because it would seem counterproductive because they have to spend more energy to move from area to area. But I think you just described it perfectly, where it makes them harder to track for
there's
humans.
Two main reasons that happens.
Yeah.
One is you don't want to deplete your food source in an area, and secondly, it avoids predators.
Yeah. Yep. I was going to ask. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you've got Mr. Black, Will,
Mm-hmm.
and I have Mrs. White. My wife doesn't want me to mention her name. Anyway, Mrs. White wants to know how a person could distinguish the difference between a human's, say my son, you saw how large my son is, how tall he is. I sent you that picture. And I'm 5'10 and a half, 5'11", and if I turn around to my boy, my nose is in his solar plexus. It's just right there. And he has a size 16 shoe. So she was looking at him one day, and it kind of popped up, this question. She brought it up the other day. She says, how could a person distinguish the difference between a human size 16 foot and a Bigfoot's print if they were both in the same conditions or leaving a print? I believe I know the answer. I already told you, but could be more coming out of you.
Well, the configuration of the foot's a little different than ours. The toes are generally lined up differently. They're flat-footed. Don't have the arch like ours does. And there's some other features. I mean, you can tell the difference.
I've got a print here that Titmus made that I put a couple of times, not hoaxing, but put in the dirt or the mud out here in the garden just to see, and then put mine compared to it. And, I showed that to her once, I believe. There's a world of difference.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a human just wearing shoes, from that, your toes get elongated, basically. I mean, at least the form of your foot,
mm-hmm.
the bone structure and so forth. When I was younger, like wingtips, they were really, really popular. Not for me, but that's exactly what I had to wear to church, every Sunday. Those things will make your little toe angle in towards the rest of the toes. It's not like a barefoot that's, and I want to say bear, I mean a human bear, a bare human's foot. It goes barefoot all the time. The toes seem to be in a nice radius across the end of the foot. You wear shoes, your big toes pushed in, your little toes pushed in. It kind of comes up at an angle, and it's not a flat foot. It doesn't print that same. And it seems like a world of difference,
Yeah, they're very distinctive.
But,
and then if you have a line of tracks, humans walk with the toes out. It's sort of a balance thing with us. The Sasquatch walk with their toes in a straight line.
Yeah, what do you call it? Splay-footed, isn't it? Isn't that what they call that? It's not pigeon-toed, but splay-foot.
Probably.
Seems like when you walk, you're flipping the feet and the toes out to the left, out to the right. Your feet are angled.
Yeah, it's sort of
That's what you're.
In humans, it's sort of a herringbone formation, how we walk.
Exactly. Yes. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, hey, Will, that actually reminds me too. Maybe the reason, and we talked about this just a few minutes ago, but the reason why they do that and the reason why their knees never lock basically is maybe a stealth thing, or maybe they don't want to make a lot of noise and so forth.
Well, I think in terms of the knees not locking is probably, more how they're engineered as opposed to, trying to be stealthy. I think it's just a product of that configuration.
Okay.
Well, I got a question, or actually we got one here. Here in America, we have a real interest. Last 60 years, there's been a big interest in the whole topic. And so you got all these groups that are looking into it, and a little bit of scientific curiosity. But do you know if any of the other countries like Australia, China, that probably have and Russia, definitely Russia, do you think any of those have more of an official scientific investigation, take a little more serious look at it?
I don't think anybody does. I mean, there's enthusiasts in a number of other places like there are here. We just have more here, but there's no official investigations that I'm aware of.
I got a question from Mrs. White. She says, please clarify as to how there could be so many types of Bigfoot. Is it like man's intervention creates different types of... The man has created different types of dogs and cats and horses, etc., through interbreeding. And it's... she's wondering if interbreeding may create the different... you got what, you got four types. There's probably more than that now. I've slept since then. But could it be through interbreeding?
Well, think of it in terms of humans with the different racial groupings. It has more to do with, environmental factors like, groups of people being separated, and then, different traits develop with different groups that aren't interbreeding. So you end up with a number of variations. And that happens...
They're just like early man.
And that happens in, lots of species.
But that'd be like early man, as I see it, the way my migration out of Africa to Europe, to Asia.
Well, there were lots of migrations out of Africa.
Yes.
There were many successive waves, so we were just the last one.
Okay.
Hey, well, I have kind of a two-part question here. How many sightings that you've come across, people that you've interviewed, describe them to be like completely wet, as if they just just emerged from the water? And kind of a follow-up to that is, have there ever been sightings that you know of them being in the water, maybe swimming?
Yeah, I don't know a number. I've had quite a few that, people saw them wet. Swimming, absolutely. Plenty of sightings of them being seen in the water and swimming. Very adept at swimming.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting, because when you do go on like the BFRO website, you don't really see a lot of stories about them in the water, but there are other ones that are not on the BFRO that I've come across that have not only said that they've emerged from the water, but they actually saw, like in one case, there was a guy that was in his car sleeping basically, and had tinted windows, and he said that and so the creature looked in the window, didn't see anybody, but he saw the creature actually go into the water and just start swimming.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to get them along the Columbia River more frequently than I thought I would. People said in one particular they seen them swim the river all the time.
That was a question, Will, that I'd asked you, months ago, because it seemed to me that I thought, wow, the Columbia River, what a great barrier. You could isolate, Washington species from Oregon species, and wrote back and said, nope, they have no problem crossing the river.
Yeah, no problem crossing that.
I guess nobody told them. if they're swimming, all right. Now, if they move differently when they're in like a prone condition or position, I'm sorry. If they move differently and can crawl in such a way that humans can't, you probably know where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
When they swim, I mean, there's a dog paddle, an Australian crawl, a side stroke. How have you ever heard anybody describe how they swam when they swim like a dog paddle with their head up out of the water? Or
Not a dog paddle. I'm trying to remember. There were a few instances, but I almost want to say just a, kind of a broad stroke with their arms, sort of a swim.
they're like putting your arms in front of you, pull them to the side and kick at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. Pulling the water towards you. Okay. That would make them bob up and down out of the water. But that would be very noticeable.
Well, it wasn't even that type of a movement. I'll have to look up the sources. If you guys can help remind me of that, I'll look up some of those and so we can get some descriptions, on one of the future shows.
That'd be interesting. Do you got a question? And this is I want to keep it with where we're at, but this question is okay. Do you think that the event of so many Bigfoot podcasts and so-called YouTube videos encounters may have led to so many others wanting to have such an encounter so much that there's and that there's been so many reports of so many people reporting seeing Bigfoot behind every tree? Do you think it's a lot of it's due to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
an example of that. It's not exactly the example, but we talked about like these structures and things. And when I published my first book, I put a couple of the mangled trees that I found, and it was something based on what Bob Titmus showed me in his home. It kept in the back of my mind when I actually found these. I sort of realized what I was looking at, and I knew when I published those that all sorts of things were going to come out, and that's exactly what's happened. So with the advent of all this information out there, sure, it creates those sorts of situations.
Well, I sent you something the other day of the fellow that it was on YouTube. The fellow that found the ceremonial Native American medicine wheel. I don't know if you got that or not, but he commented about how perfectly it was made and how that all the quartz, how there's so many quartz stones laying in the circle, and how a human being couldn't have done that, and how straight the lines were, and it was a medicine wheel, a ceremonial location. And of course there wasn't any quartz laying outside the circle. It had all been picked up and used in the circle. But they commented about how it had to be a Bigfoot that made it. And there was two of them. One of them should have been to the east, and the other one should have been to the west. I don't know. I sent that to you. You don't have to comment on that one.
I'm not sure I got it, but as far as somebody believes the Sasquatch made this kind of a device,
yeah,
I doubt it very highly, to be honest with you.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know. It's a 100-pound rock, and he says no human could move that. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe not one human,
right?
But putting that medicine circle together, I'm not going to get into it. I'm part Native American, but it's putting it together is a ceremony in itself.
Right.
Let's just say that, But I was amazed at how many things become Bigfoot.
Oh, yeah. Things that are totally unrelated.
Yeah. I passed a big boulder today, and it had consecutively smaller boulders piled on the top of it. And if I can think to take a picture of it next time I'm through there, I will. It's this guy's driveway marker.
Right.
Is what it is. It's his driveway marker. I saw him out there stacking them. But I thought when I saw that, oh yeah, I got to get a picture of this for all these stacked rocks. And when people will go into areas, it's just, I don't know. I find it to be kind of funny, and I don't mean to monopolize. But you'll hear people say, this is an area that no one has ever been. No one's ever been back here. It's so hard to get to. It's a hard, well, what are they doing there?
Right.
They got back there. and it's probably within 2 miles of a road. And I know I go 2 miles back in, 7 miles off a main road on a dirt road, and then 2 miles back. Anybody can get there. So I've always been amazed at that. Anyway, okay, I'm not going to lead into anything else off of that.
But hey, John, I want to comment on that because I listened to, I think he's one of the Mr. Blacks, a guy named Lee, fascinating part 1, part 2 series quite a while ago. And he said something that really caught my attention, and that was he had attributed some things to Bigfoot, and then as his understanding evolved, he discounted a lot of stuff. And I thought that was it's kind of an honest self-assessment to come back and say, well, wait a second, no, that wasn't. My learning has, I can now discount these things that I originally attributed to Bigfoot.
Lee.
I think you're absolutely.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I think you're absolutely correct on that. To thine own self be true. If you're going to do a study, you're going to have to, or research, or investigation, you're going to have to get to a point somewhere in that you're going to have to realize and tell yourself, okay, this could be something else. But,
it's very important to do that. And I would consider myself, I haven't even, as far as my knowledge goes and my experience, I haven't even risen to the level of an amateur. I have had some experiences, but one thing I do want to mention is just recently, I thought that I had found something. I was like, how could that really look like it was manipulated? It was a quote-unquote wood structure. And I took pictures of it, and I think I sent it to Will. I may have sent one to somebody else. And I went back there recently. It's still there. And one of the comments that Will had made was, I think Mr. Black had said, when these things do something, I'm assuming territorial markers or maybe the X, I don't know, they don't leave it up for very long. They'll take it right back down. And this quote unquote what I thought may have been a structure, I was kind of on the fence anyway. I went back there and it's still there. So disappointing. I thought, oh, that would have been so cool if that had been a Bigfoot structure. But on the other hand, it's very, very important if you really want to get to the bottom of things and you're looking for the truth, you have to be open to your own, I guess, journey of learning, to learn to discount things and say, nope, there's no way, that's not it. Now I...
Yeah. Well, nature, gravity, and trees have a strange way of playing tricks on you.
Oh, they do. They absolutely do.
And it's the first time someone sees something like that, they want to see a Bigfoot so bad. Were those structures in Colorado by chance that you saw?
No. I'm out in Oregon. I know what you're talking about. Colorado.
We left an awful lot of tree structures in Colorado in some of the survival camps that we were in because we only carried a tarp in with us, or we would build a rubbish hut, debris hut, just a lot of stakes around and bark and build up the sides and maybe burn a fire in the middle, maybe not, let body heat take it, but that was just survival stuff. So
right, people have been doing that for centuries. So that's, like you said, that's a well-established way for people to build a structure out in the woods, and you're not going to tear that down when you leave. You're just, that's a lot of work. So
that's where you come back to hunt from next year.
Exactly right. So just I guess kind of a kudos to you that you're right. There's a lot of stuff out there that if people are looking, what I did or when I first started getting into this, I went to areas that I knew there's no way that they would. Sasquatch had nothing to do with it. Sacred thing, and just sort of doing like created my own little photo database of quote unquote tree structures, teepees, and all that kind of stuff. It's everywhere.
Whenever I see a tree structure, a teepee. I'll look to see what the base of the sapling or the tree looks like, how big it is, if it's from the area, if it's rotted, and when I see something snapped off, I always go look at it really, really good to see if there's any infestation in it. I used to work with trees when I was a teenager, summer after summer after summer, and I've seen trees snap and twist and fall. The canopy on some of them are so off weight, it may snap on the right side. Well, I don't mean right and left, but if it snaps in the right place and starts to fall, the canopy of that tree at the top can be off-weighted enough that it could twist counterclockwise or clockwise, and you end up with a snap tree that's twisted. I've seen bears snap trees, too, in videos.
And what you're talking about, I've actually seen as well.
Yeah.
And I've seen it where it's twisted so the cambium, you still got the bark there, but the cambium's exposed.
Exactly.
It's a natural thing.
Well, it's like Will and I, on one of the interviews, I said, I challenge anybody to take a 1-inch green stick, hold it in your hand, wring it out like a wash rag at your solar plexus, and twist it. Not break it, but twist it. Go ahead. See if you can do it. It's nearly impossible.
Take a 1-inch dowel and try to just snap it.
Oh, yeah.
Good luck. And then you take that 3-inch tree, because I found 6 of them, and they although I didn't see the Sasquatch do it, every single one of them was virtually identical. They snapped at about the 8-foot level. Every tree was green. It was snapped at it was about 3 inches in diameter, and they seemed to all point in a direction. And ultimately, they ended up pointing down to this one lake. And so a 3-inch tree, and these are all the other trees are fine, right? It was not deadfall, windfall, snow. It was nothing like that.
That'd be something to look at now.
Grab a tree like 4 and snap it. Have fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, in martial arts, I've driven my hand through 1-inch boards before. Of course, I pay for it now. But yeah.
Those are the kind of trees that I've found. And I've had a few other people find exactly the same thing. So when you find consistently, mangled or damaged trees that are young, that are not diseased, people, all these different criteria, it really fits the mold. And again, it's what's been talked about before in the past. And
and it's kind of scary because you look at that tree, like, what kind of strength did that?
Yeah, it gets your attention quick, let me tell you.
Yeah.
You think elephant first. I mean, it takes a lot of strength to do exactly that. Yeah.
Right.
Hey, question. I'm still kind of up in the air on this one. Wood knocking. I don't recall anything in say the 1800s or early accounts of anything about wood knocking. Now, I've heard this. This is what got my attention first. And then it was on that show with Leonard Nimoy that they were talking about Bigfoot back in '74. And that's when I heard it there, and that's when I put a couple of things together, what I had heard earlier, a year or two maybe earlier. And it seemed like everything started to come together in 1974 for me. But they called wood knocking on that show, and I have heard it since. I heard it about 4 years ago, and it moved, it rotated, and I was in the woods, and there wasn't anything off to the, but sound does travel on water. There was a lake off to the east of me, or the north of me, I'm sorry, and woodland off to the south of me. There was lake off to the east of me, and curled around to the west of me. And I'm hearing, and there's only about 300 yards between me and the lake, and I'm hearing this wood knocking off to my, I guess, my north, and then I hear it answered off to my south, and it's moving. Now, I haven't read anything about wood knocking, so are wood knocks real? And if they are, what the hey is making that sound if it's not a Bigfoot?
Well, it was never talked about any of the history, and what the Indians say is they whistle. I think if there's a noise that's, people think are wood knocks, quote unquote, it's probably tongue popping.
All right.
Now we have people, I have a recording myself that was sent to me. It sounds like a baseball bat, it's almost like a gunshot. The noise is so loud. I can see him doing something like that. But just to go around and beat on trees, I don't buy it.
Well, that gets down to the idea we've talked about before, where anybody, mushroom hunter, I don't care who you are, go out in the woods, find a stick laying on the ground. The only thing I can see, they're all rotted, it's all rotted. And anything you hit a tree with is going to snap or break because it came out of the tree for one reason or another, whether it was snapped off from a wind or due to disease.
Right.
It's degraded as it's coming down. Now, I could see smacking a couple of rocks together, something like that, but I don't know what's making like you said, maybe it's tongue popping. Well, maybe that's what it is.
Right, and think of it this way too. If you're a predator, you don't want to do too much to give yourself away. If your prey knows you're in the area. So going around and beating on trees is not something you're going to do a whole bunch.
That would definitely get rid of a lot of animals around you.
Exactly.
And with tongue popping, it's going to sound further off because it's going to be a lesser noise than, say, slapping your hands together or a loud, a Louisville slugger or whatever, they got the Bigfoot knockers they're beating on trees with. It's going to sound further off. And that's when I've heard people say, well, hey, I heard it. And when I turned around, they were only like about 40 feet from me. The tongue popping could make it seem like they were maybe 400 feet.
Sure.
Well, the thing with the tongue popping is you've got your tongue with you all the time. You don't need, you're not restricted to dry wood or damp forest. Right?
Makes sense to me. Yeah.
Listen, fellas, we're running short of time. One final thing from each member here. Brian.
Okay, well,
yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I have a question because I know that you've talked in the past about kind of a falling out between Renee and John Green.
Right.
But did they ever stay in touch after that point? Or were they just went their separate ways and just never even communicated again?
Well, it was rare, and depending on what the circumstance was, they would occasionally call one another.
Okay, but did they ever become like friendly with each other again, or
no?
It was kind of an animosity between them.
Even the day that Renee passed away, he tried calling John Green, and Green refused to talk to him.
Wow.
I don't think that he knew that Renee was dying. I don't think that Bobby Short, who was his nurse at the time, conveyed that to Green. But then later, she said that Green complained that, they hadn't talked. But, she said he refused the phone call.
Wow.
That could have been a I'm sorry kind of thing. Forgive me.
Well, it was Renee supposedly had information for Green, so Green didn't want to hear it.
All right.
Tom?
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to say that was a missed opportunity, unfortunately. So real quick question, and I've heard this, that maybe in an area where you have a lot of Sasquatch activity, if they're eating pets or catching your pets, maybe one way for somebody to discover this is with number of missing pet posters on bulletin boards or telephone poles. Have you heard of this?
No, nobody's compiled any of that information that I'm aware of.
Okay.
John, any
I've
final
got,
thoughts?
yeah. Something that I heard you say one time, and I'm trying to remember exactly, the Birdman's rule. It has to do with form and size adaptation to size, volume, stress. The size of a Bigfoot maybe, or like one might be barrel-chested in one area, as opposed to maybe a skunk ape is smaller, a different form. Does the Birdman's rule apply to that? I know a lot of people may not know about that Birdman's rule. And I'm not sure if I'm saying the name right.
Yeah, our anthropologist and I discussed that a while back. Darn it, I don't have it right in front of me either. I like to quote those kinds of things. Oh, darn it. Hold on. My computer's making a bunch of noise here. Sorry, folks. Let me check real quick. Check some notes here real fast. Sorry about that. Doggone it. It was a while back. There's a lot of things I don't just keep in the forefront of my mind because there's so much information to cover. So this is one of those that I have to rely on notes. Okay.
I always sleep since then, and I forget it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's just... And, of course, I have everything on computer, so it's going to run slow today. So... Okay. Well, Bergman's rule refers to the size of an animal in cold. We're talking cold or warm environments, and Bergman's rule, in other words, the Sasquatch does better being large in cold environments. That's what that refers to.
Yeah. That makes sense. All right.
And it has to do with heat loss and things like that. So it's, and actually their upright posture supports, them retaining heat as opposed to losing it because there's a smaller area for it to be lost from. So I'm looking at my notes here. It's, it says larger bodied animals tend to conform more closely to Bergman's rule than smaller bodied animals. At least up to certain latitudes. So, there were people asking at one point about the Sasquatch, how would it function, with its size, how would it keep warm in very cold climates? And by definition, they're sort of tailor-made for colder environments by their size and structure.
Well, then the description of the skunk ape and being smaller, you're talking about a warmer environment like Florida.
Right, and smaller
they don't
creatures
have to
would be in a warmer environment.
Yeah. Okay, so that's not the exact opposite, but it works the other end of the scale.
Right, they would tend to be smaller there than elsewhere.
Okay.
All right, fellas.
I couldn't remember what it was. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll pick up more of these questions next week. So everyone, be sure to stay tuned for the third segment of the show, Jim Sower's narration. So, fellas, thanks for joining us, John and Tom and Brian. Great questions as always, fellas.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah. We'll see you next week.
Welcome. This collection of 5 stories is being brought to you by William Jevning and is being narrated by me, Jim Sower. Number 1 is The Zubies. Number 2, Bruce Peninsula. Number 3, Bigfoot Buzz. Number 4, Waterton National Park. And number 5, Milestones on the Mighty Fraser River. Story number 1. The Zoobies, 1971. Alpine, San Diego County, California. 1992 interview with Sergeant Doug Hughes, San Diego County Sheriff's Department. Interviewer: Okay, just go ahead and tell me about yourself, when you started working there, and so on. Hughes: I started working the Alpine area, east of San Diego, California, in March of 1970. I came to the department the previous year. I was working out there in a patrol capacity for the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. I was a deputy at the time and actually worked Alpine for about 2 years, from March of 1970 to April of 1972. As far as trying to recall exactly when this went down, the best I can come up with is that it was after the Laguna Fire of 1970, September of 1970. Interviewer: The Laguna Fire affected which areas? Hughes: Well, it was the largest brush fire at the time in California history. It burned specifically in the Sweetwater River area from east of Alpine all the way south and west, probably another 15 miles. It was quite an extensive burn, and through the area in question, Alpine, on the south side of Interstate 8. To recall the chain of events, it was extremely cold, which means the time of year would have been sometime after September of 1970, probably December or January, maybe February. Let's see, that would be 1971. Well, it was definitely winter. Interviewer: Was that about the time of your first contact with the key witness, Dr. Badur? Prominent San Diego psychiatrist. Hughes: Yes, and I don't recall the reason, but Dr. Badur was stopped by a two-man patrol unit. Badur was traveling eastbound, which would have been from the San Diego area to what we learned later was his home in Alpine. On the front seat of his car, I don't remember what kind of car it was, he had a loaded .44 Magnum revolver with a 6-inch barrel. That's the same type of gun that Dirty Harry made famous. It's the largest caliber handgun you can buy. Of course, this piqued our interest a little bit. It wasn't the contact, it was what we call the cover during this particular stop. My partner's the one who made first contact and found the gun. He secured the revolver and was asking the doctor, who identified himself as Dr. Badur, why he was carrying the weapon. Badur said it was because of and I don't know what he actually said at the time, but my partner heard him say Zuby. And so, from there on, all of our conversations throughout the department referred to whatever Dr. Badur had seen as a Zuby. That wasn't what the doctor actually called it, I don't believe, but that's what my partner heard, and that's how the name got coined. Interviewer: At the time, did Dr. Badur describe the Zuby to the officer? Hughes: Yes, he did, to both of us, as a matter of fact. He described the Zuby as a large, upright, walking, hairy creature. Dr. Badur convinced us, and later other members of my department, including one of my patrol sergeant, that in truth he had had 3 separate encounters with the Zubis. Interviewer: Did Dr. Badur say how many of these Zubis there were and where the sightings happened? Hughes: Yeah, one sighting was made by his entire family within the confines of his yard and immediate area, and one time they saw 3 Zubis. What Dr. Badur described to us was what he assumed was a father, mother, and child, with the largest of the Zubis being over 6 feet tall, maybe 7 feet tall. The tallest was very hairy and much larger framed than the ordinary man. What he described as the mother was about 5 feet tall, and the smaller one was about 3 or 4 feet tall. Like I said, the doctor convinced a number of us that he'd in fact seen something unusual. What happened then was that we did get involved in an investigation of the sightings. I did because of the shift I worked, which was either 10 p.m. at night to 6 a.m., or what we called the evening or overlap shift, which was from 6 p.m. to 2:30 in the morning. Neither of those shifts was conducive to interviewing citizens in the area, so I wasn't able to locate other witnesses. And I can't recall if I ever talked to a deputy who canvassed the area looking for witnesses. Interviewer: How many people lived in the area at the time? Hughes: There were very few homes, probably 5 or no more than 6 residences, and Badur's was the last home on the narrow road. Going back in my memory 20 years now, I'd say his house was a quarter to a third of a mile off the main road used to get to his place, almost in a straight line due south of Alpine Boulevard. That area hasn't grown much since then. No planned residential development in there. At that time, the Badur family themselves consisted of the doctor, his wife, a daughter, and a son. The daughter was 17 and the son was younger, maybe 13 or 14. Interviewer: Can you describe what the terrain looks like? Is it actually alpine forest, etc.? Hughes: It's not a forest by any means. The elevation's no more than 2,300 feet. The road goes east and up, and in about another 20 miles it eventually climbs to about 5,000 feet. Interviewer: Does it continue up into forested areas? Hughes: Yes, it does, and it follows the Sweetwater River. It's about 10 miles. The Sweetwater River isn't much of a flowing river. It runs about 3/4 of a mile south of Dr. Badur's place. Of course, it always depends on the rainfall, but the river hasn't run continuously any time in the last 20 years I've been familiar with the area. There's no snowfall at all. The terrain itself is quite steep behind Dr. Badur's property, going down into the Sweetwater River bottom itself. It's all primarily brush and chaparral. Interviewer: Any bears in the area? Hughes: I don't think I've ever heard of a bear sighting in San Diego County, and again, I've been in the area almost 23 years. We have deer everywhere here, along with coyotes and fox and other types of wildlife, but no bears. What else do you remember about Dr. Badur's sightings? Hughes: Well, let's see. The first set of circumstances I remember was Dr. Badur finding damage to the house when he'd just moved in. He said he had bought the house from an older German couple, and all of the light bulbs, inside and out, were the yellow bug repellent type. Badur said the German man told me that he shouldn't change them to white, that he should get used to the yellow light. Interviewer: Because of an insect problem? Hughes: Well, Badur said the German was very evasive about that. Evasive also about a lot of details regarding the house and property. The property did have some acreage. I don't recall the size, but it was larger than a city lot anyway. The property had some fruit trees in the front and backyards. I don't remember what kind of fruit trees they were, but the house and trees were surrounded by a fence. One of Badur's complaints was that fruit was being picked off the trees at the tops, but not from the bottoms. The trees were upward of 7 or 8 feet high, or maybe 10 feet high. Anyway, the fruit was disappearing from the tops of his trees, and his fence was getting knocked down. He had a wind chime at one of the doors, made of brass or some kind of strong metal, which frequently rang in the blowing wind, and at one point the wind chime suddenly turned up flattened. Badur couldn't explain it, and we couldn't duplicate it. It was smashed. Badur did make a plaster cast of a footprint, and I know we had photographs of it, if we didn't in fact have a plaster cast of the print ourselves. But I do recall there was a plaster cast. Interviewer: Do you remember the approximate size of the footprint? Hughes: Oh, I'm 6'3", and I wear a size 12 shoe, and I'd have to say that this one was larger than my shoe and much wider than my foot. I'd say it was about 13 or 14 inches in length, and I've been racking my brain trying to remember if it had 4 toes or 5 toes, but I just can't recall. According to researcher Ken Kuhn, who visited the Alpine area in 1971, Dr. Badur's Zubis left V-shaped, 4-toed footprints 16 inches long and 8 inches wide, with the widest measurement across the toes. The foot narrowed down to 5 inches at the heel. Interviewer: But there's some recollection that it might have been an unusual number of toes? Hughes: Yes, I do seem to remember that, but I can't bring it to mind. I know the footprint was wide overall and less wide at the heel, but the heel was still wider than a human foot would be. Interviewer: Did you or any of the officials talk to the doctor's wife or kids? Hughes: Well, specifically the word came back to me, and I'm not sure which deputy found out, but the daughter said she had a sighting in the early morning hours as she boarded a school bus at Alpine Boulevard. That would have been adjacent to the access road leading to the Badur house. She was getting on the bus and spotted the creature off in the brush. There's some very thick, very tall brush along the road there. Interviewer: Do you remember any details of what she saw? Hughes: No, not really. The man who was deeply involved in this was my patrol sergeant, and he's now deceased. He was so involved with it that on his days off he'd go up there and camp to the rear of the Badur's house. He'd take his older son along, and the two of them would camp out in hope of getting a glimpse of one of the Zoobies. They never did, but he was the man who probably had more conversations with the doctor than anybody else. Another sighting involved 3 Zoobies sighted by a whole family. The Badurs had made it a habit to never go out after dark, but one night they were out with the son to call in their pet dog. In the dark, the boy thought he saw the dog near the corner of the house and called out to it. Well, the dog came running back, but from a different corner, and what at first they thought was the dog turned out to be the smaller Zoobie. Apparently, it had been laying down, and it got up and stood and walked the opposite way, joining the other 2, the larger male and female, and they all walked off into the brush. Interviewer: Did they ever use words like ape or gorilla to describe the creatures? Hughes: No, they never did. Badur was firm in his own mind that it wasn't an ape or gorilla. It was something totally different than one of those. Well, for lack of anything better, we thought it to be more like the California Bigfoot, based on how it was described. Whether it was black or brown, I really can't remember. Interviewer: Did Dr. Badur ever use the word Bigfoot or Sasquatch to describe the Zoobie? Hughes: Not to me, no. As a matter of fact, we were assigned to make periodic checks of his residence throughout the night because most of the damage to his property was done during the nighttime. So my partner and I, in a 2-man car, would drive up there and shine the spotlight around his house. Dr. Badur was very convincing. I can still picture him coming outdoors one night dressed in his skivvies and wearing black high-top military boots. That was it, a T-shirt and shorts with those black military boots carrying that big .44 Magnum. Interviewer: How would you characterize the family? It sounds as though they were all educated. Credible people? Hughes: Yes, I'd characterize them exactly that way. I got to the impression that the daughter was very intelligent, and of course Badur himself was a medical doctor, a psychiatrist. Interviewer: In our earlier phone call to arrange the interview, you mentioned something about the creatures, the Zoobies, mimicking human speech? Hughes: Yes. One of the lighter stories I recall happened when the doctor got home after dark one night. They had chickens there, and earlier he'd called his wife to say he was going to be late and remind her to feed the chickens before nightfall, which she did. When the doctor got home, he had to exit his car, open the gate, drove through and stopped, then got out of the car again to close the gate behind him. He said that when he went to close the gate that night, he heard a very low, very guttural voice say, "Here, chickie, chickie, chickie." Interviewer: That's funny, and not unprecedented in the research. Are you saying the impression was that one of the creatures was imitating the doctor's wife who called in the chickens earlier? Hughes. Exactly. It was the doctor's opinion, and we had no reason to doubt him, that the Zubi had some type of intelligence and the capability of producing sound like that. Interviewer. Did they ever describe any other sounds or smells, anything like that? Hughes. Smells, yes. A very pungent odor. Maybe like rotting garbage. You know, he did tell us he'd set up cameras around his house with tripwires, but he wasn't able to get any photographs, at least not while I was working in the area. I really can't recall, but I know the doctor himself had a close sighting of one of the Zubis, and there were probably other sightings, but I can't remember now. Of course, I worked up there for just 2 years until April of 1972. After that, I went to flying helicopters, so I was completely out of touch with what was happening in Alpine, and I didn't get back there until 1981. At that time, I was stationed east of the Badur home, and I didn't hear anything more. I did hear something about the Proctor Valley monster when I started patrol in 1970, which, if true, I'd have to assume was on the order of what Dr. Badur was describing. Now, a few years ago, a deputy told me he saw a dark-colored, large, upright, furry creature, not a bear, not a human, up in some rocks north of Interstate 8, and possibly northwest of El Capitan Reservoir. The deputy told me it was a good distance away. Also, I was involved in a juvenile diversion camp near Julian, northeast of Alpine, and a couple of counselors from another camp came down and told us they'd seen something they couldn't identify in the mountains. After talking with them, it was concluded that what they'd seen was probably a Zubi. Another thing we found out during our investigation of Dr. Badur's sightings was that the Viejas Indians Reservation, just north of Interstate 80, had a legend about a giant hairy man that was the protector of their burial grounds. And those burial grounds were located just about 2 miles north of where Dr. Badur lived. Updated in 2006. Note: the 1971 Alpine incident is described in John Green's book, Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us, pages 311 through 312. Dr. Badur no longer lives in Alpine, but his family is somewhere in San Diego County. The house is now slightly different, but looks much as it did in the 70s. The terrain's the same, now more populated, steep and dry and full of thicket. Throughout the years, attempts to interview Dr. Badur by researchers not involved in the initial investigations have failed. As recently as July of 1992, the doctor, who currently has an active practice in San Diego, still refused to comment at length on his family's bygone experiences, saying only that he is going to tell the whole story in an upcoming book. But 35 years later, no book has been published. Dr. Badur implied that the Zubis of Alpine altered his view of reality, and, he said, his book, along with the truth about Zubis, will impact mankind. The original report was attributed to Detective Ken Kuhn, a former Los Angeles police detective. Kuhn spent a considerable amount of time investigating the Badur report. He came away convinced the sightings were authentic. That's the end of the number 1 story, The Zubis. Story number 2, Bruce Peninsula, Ontario, Canada, 2012. I grew up in a little town on the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. We lived on the river, and past our property was nothing but pristine bush for miles. I remember one day as a small child being scared speechless when I looked into the tree line and saw Sasquatch. It was only 15 feet from me and was watching. and I froze with fear. Then it turned and walked into the bush. I was about 8 years old at the time. 5 years later, I moved up to our cabin, and that summer, late at night, 3 in the morning, for about 2 weeks, I could hear something echoing up the river valley, and so life went on. At the age of 19, after being evicted from a house I was staying at, I moved into the most remote woods I could think of, to where I thought I could live undisturbed. It was near the end of March, and tough living out there with nothing, but I built a small place for shelter in a thicket and lived by the fire. The forest there is so alive and full of life, I used to listen to all the different animals that would frequently circle my place. One night I came back from a trip into the nearest town. It was 3 in the morning. I just arrived at my place after the long walk and sat down to listen as I always did, and heard footsteps walking in the same place I had just walked. Unmistakable, heavy footsteps. It was something on 2 feet, and then it just stopped about 25 feet from where I was, and it didn't make a sound. It wasn't until that moment that I remembered the screams I used to hear when I was younger, and that I was now living in the approximate spot downstream from where I used to live. I didn't move, and neither did it. So, after 40 minutes, I just went to sleep. I'm 42 now, and thinking back, what a perfect place for a Sasquatch to live. There is no bush quite like that of the Bruce Peninsula. I still roam the forests alone, day and night, unafraid but always respectful of nature. There is so much we don't know or understand, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I know what I saw, and I know what I heard, and I truly believe. Oh, how lucky I am to have had these experiences and others as well. Most people don't experience these things because they aren't out there living in harmony with nature. I know the Sasquatch meant me no harm, just curious about me living on its turf. That's it in a nutshell. In another forest I encountered 2 entities, but that is another story. If you want to hear it, let me know. I've never really shared these stories, but I figured someone might be interested in hearing them. Battery is dying now. Gotta go. Jonathan Burroughs, September 25th, 2012, 11:19 p.m. This is the end of story number 2, Bruce Peninsula. Story number 3, Bigfoot Buzz, by Linnell Sinclair and Lauren Olson. December 2005. Factoid: the name the Modoc Indians of California call Bigfoot is Matacagni, circa 1897, Tanzi Buzhu. This is our first column for the First Perspective newspaper, and we are both really excited about the following stories that we are sharing with you. We started this column in the previous month for the Manitoba Provincial Aboriginal newspaper, The Drum. We want you to know that when you email us, we will not share your name. We respect your privacy, and we know from first-hand experience the difficulties of sharing stories like these. We've been researching Sasquatch for years now, and we have tons of stories to share with you. Here are some stories. We hope that you enjoy reading them as much as we have compiling them. This photograph shows a track imprint which was measured at 19 inches long and 11 inches wide across the toes, photographed by Linnell Sinclair in late spring 2001 near Grand Rapids, Manitoba. Our first story comes from the Lake of the Woods, a provincial park bordering on eastern Manitoba and northwestern Ontario. Jessica was camping with her 2 friends. They were the only people at this particular campground that weekend. The girls pitched their tent and enjoyed their evening. They settled down for the evening and went to sleep. Sometime during the night, something started howling around their campsite. This woke up the two girls, but Jessica continued to sleep blissfully unaware of what was going on. The two girls were both frightened because something was outside making all kinds of noise, howling, grunting, and circling their tent. Whenever it got close to where they were standing in their tent, they would move to the other side. Her two friends, meanwhile, were watching while Jessica was starting to be pushed by something from the outside of the tent. Jessica was still sleeping while this was happening. The amazing thing was, whatever it was made her turn over while she was sleeping. Jessica didn't wake up. The stranger continued to circle their camp and drop what they discovered to be, in the morning, pine cones on the top of their tent. Eventually it left, and the girls did not sleep for the rest of the night. About 4 in the morning, Jessica woke up. She heard weird howling far off in the woods. The next morning the girls left and were quite shaken by what had happened. It was in the late fall, just past midnight, when our next report happened. The witness was driving on Highway 50 on her way to Sandy Bay, Manitoba. Sandy Bay, Ojibwe First Nation reserves in Manitoba. As she was driving, she suddenly spotted something squatting on the side of the road. She swerved to miss it and, at the same time, turned to see what it was. Her mouth went dry and her heart beat faster as she realized it was a sabe. Sabe, Sasquatch. It was holding something with both hands and eating it, perhaps roadkill. It seemed to move in slow motion as it lifted its head to look up at her passing by in her vehicle. The witness looked directly into its face, which was covered by dark hair, and its eyes appeared to be small and beady. Its face reminded her of a gorilla. It was swarmed by what appeared to be a cloud of mosquitoes. It looked hunchbacked because of the way it was sitting on the road. The sabi appeared to show no fear, even though she had almost hit it. As she passed it, she swerved into the other lane, and when she was about 75 feet away from where it was, she slammed on the brakes. She turned back to look at the sabe, and that's when it stood up on two legs, very fluidly and gracefully. She screamed and stepped on the gas pedal, fearing it would approach her. She drove like a maniac to her family's home and told a relative what she had seen, crying while she talked. The relative had difficulty believing this incredible story, as do most people when they are told these stories. She had a hard time sleeping that night, and to this day she doesn't drive alone at night on this highway, and she feels anxious when she drives through the area. The third story comes from an unusual setting, a honeymoon. Mary and Joe were on their honeymoon and stopped off the highway in Oregon's beautiful mountains to take a picture. They got out of the car, and Joe climbed up an embankment and posed. Mary snapped his picture, and they carried on. After returning home to Winnipeg, they started showing their honeymoon pictures to friends. One friend gasped at the picture of Joe standing on the outcrop and asked if they were afraid of what stood behind him. Unbeknownst to them, at the time the picture was taken, a dark figure was standing behind him. Though this figure is some distance in the back of Joe, it still appears larger than he is. Both Mary and Joe cannot remember any unusual smell or seeing any tracks at that site. It is possible they may have stumbled onto the path of this Bigfoot and caught it off guard, and it curiously looked on for the moment the humans were there. A man from Alberta was visiting his relatives in BC when he and his cousin went swimming in a remote lake area. His cousin Fred returned to the shore ahead of him while he continued swimming for a while. He decided to sneak up on his cousin and swim quietly just below the surface to shore. Partly seeing what he thought was Fred standing on the shore, he jumped out of the water to startle him, but instantly became startled himself. Before him stood a large, hairy man figure, between 7 and 8 feet tall. He noticed it was very muscular but thoroughly covered with black hair. He thought it looked eerily similar to a human. His cousin was nowhere in sight. This encounter lasted only a few seconds, as he and the creature startled each other and ran in opposite directions. He said he was not happy to have had this rare encounter and will not return to that area. That is the end of story number 3, Bigfoot Buzz. Story number 4, Waterton National Park, Alberta, Canada. Near Waterton National Park, Alberta, Canada, May 2002. During my training as a tour guide for Glacier National Park, I decided to take a trip on another guide's bus to see Waterton. This would be in late May of 2002. We were coming back from Waterton, still in Canada, when the driver, tour guide, pointed out what appeared to be a fisherman walking along the river. The other tourists didn't seem too interested, but I was. I noticed that the so-called fisherman was walking funny, strange gait to his walk. I then looked closer to see that this being moved with an ape-like walk and was naked, as in no clothes, but hairy all over. And when I was a child around 4 or 5, living in Arizona, I went camping with my parents near a place called Strawberry. We had been fishing early in the morning. My parents were cooking fish for lunch, so I decided to climb up on the top of a boulder near our campsite. When I got on top of the rock, I noticed through the pine branches a face staring right at me. It had a calm look on its face and was very tall. We were eye to eye. I also noticed that it was naked and hairy all over. My parents came back to pick me up for lunch, and this being ran away into the woods. A few weeks later, I saw a movie based on In Search of Bigfoot. I had nightmares for a few years. I now know that this being did not wish me harm. It was just curious. I remember the next day walking around the boulder and seeing huge footprints. Thank you for your site. I feel you have the most informative site on the internet. I still am in search of this being we call Bigfoot. I will keep you up to date on any new information I come across. Scott Barlow, Jr. Tuesday, January 7th, 2003, 10:19 a.m. This is the end of story number 4. Story number 5, Milestones on the Mighty Fraser, Bannock Bread, Use of Fire, by C.P. Lyons, pages 28, 29, and 30. As you read this, bear in mind the book was published in 1950, probably researched and compiled in the late 30s or 40s, certainly long before tabloid newspapers, general media interest, and the internet wreaked havoc with the facts. Hairy Giants, Laidlaw, British Columbia, is a small station on the Canadian National Railroad. Close to it is an Indian reserve. There are many such small reserves along the Fraser River, but this one had the doubtful honor not long ago of playing unwilling host to a fearsome hairy giant. The oral story of the Indians has it that a mysterious race of giants, known as the Sasquatch, live in the high mountains around Harrison Lake. Over the years, various Indians have reported brief encounters with these individuals. Such stories are not easily discounted, for the Indians have a remarkable memory for detail and find little purpose in distorting the facts as they know them. Various people in close contact with the Indians have no doubts that, at least, the remnants of such a race of giants do exist in the hidden vastness of the coastal mountains. 1 or 2 expeditions have been attempted to investigate, but were forced back by extremely rough and hostile terrain. The following instances are only 2 of the many stories told by the Indians. An Indian woman living near Laidlaw related them in all seriousness. Over 100 years ago, roughly 1850, when the Indians were berry picking, one woman who had strayed from the others was suddenly confronted by a giant. Too paralyzed with fear to scream or run, she was quickly carried up the steep mountainside. After a long climb, during which time she remained in a semi-coma, and so did not note direction or length of time, she was carried through a rough door into a large rock cave. 2 other Indian women were crouched in the cave and, when left alone with the new arrival, told her they had been captured in a similar manner years ago. They had been brought as wives for the giants and had since borne children. The men giants would disappear for months at a time and then return with food. For the new woman they brought flour and smoked fish that they knew she was accustomed to eating. The fact that there was flour dates this story as taking place after the arrival of the Hudson's Bay traders in 1827 to 1840. Although the woman had been a captive for over a year and had borne a child, she was determined to escape. The other 2 women told her they would help, and when the hairy giants left on one of their seasonal hunting trips, she was told to prepare all the food she could. She made bread, or bannock, suggesting that these giant people, or the Indian women, at least used fire and, with a heavy pack of food, set out across the mountains. Bannock traditionally was a large, round, cake-like bread that required baking. It was usually made from barley, wheat, or oatmeal, often combined with elk or moose lard, varying according to region. After almost unendurable hardships, she became exhausted and was carried and helped along by the other 2 women who possessed the giant's strength in some measure. She was left in a stupor near where she had originally disappeared. The villagers saw her, but she suddenly became afraid of them and fled. She was pursued and carried to her father's house, where she fainted and remained under a spell. Perhaps nervous collapse from the birth and year-long ordeal. The Indians believed that the giants held some mental power over her, but with careful nursing she eventually recovered. The second episode is still fresh in many of the Indians' memories. Several years ago, in the vicinity of Laidlaw, a hairy giant entered a house and caused a woman and her 2 children to flee in terror. Later, footprints approximately 20 inches long were found clearly imprinted in the mud along the route the woman had taken. Although she was not captured, she has since refused to live in the house. Hair was caught in the door jamb and was reportedly reddish in color. A 40-gallon barrel of salted fish had been picked up and dumped over, and the retreating footprints showed that the Sasquatch had merely stepped over the railroad fences and returned directly to the steep mountain slopes. At the end of the book's excerpt on the Indians and the Sasquatch, Lyon's report mentions the use of fire to bake bread, or bannock, but leaves us to wonder if the Indian woman had used fire, the Sasquatch used it, or just tolerated her use of fire, and whether or not the Sasquatch and native offspring survived. The text also suggests the Sasquatch had knowledge of what the captive Indian woman liked, and where to go to get it, but offers no conclusion, leaving the reader with more questions than answers. Bobby Short. Lyons, Chester Peter, Chess, 1915, December 20th, 1998, was a Canadian-born outdoorsman and natural historian who penned Milestones on the Mighty Fraser, published by J.M. Dent and Sons, Canada, 1950. Milestone in Ogopogo Land, in which the many wonders of the land of Ogopogo and Sunshine are revealed, 1957. Milestones on Vancouver Island. The story of this island to the west is past and is present, 1958. This ends the reading of the 5 stories. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.